Hello, students. Welcome to EasyElimu Learning Simplified. My name is Mr. Stanley Mbogo. Dear students, in this session, we are looking at the summary of the third episode of An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro. And in this session, we are going to look at the scenes and events that we have in that is as from November 1949. Remember, we have looked at the first two episodes in our previous in the previous videos. That is the scenes and events that we have in October 1948, and again the scenes of events that we have in that is April 1949. So allow me take you through that is episode 3 summary, dear students, by looking at some of the major or striking events that we have in this episode. So talking about the episode that is November 1949, Ono remembers the first time he met Dr. Saito clearly. So it was 16 years ago, the day after he moved into his house. So Ono was placing a sign with his name on his gate post when Dr. Saito approached, introduced himself, and told Ono that it was an honor to have an artist of his stature in the neighborhood. So in the years after that first meeting, that is in the years after their first meeting, Dr. Saito and Ono always greeted each other politely when they would run into one another. So he remembers this first meeting clearly enough that he is sure Setsuko was mistaken in some of the things she said the previous month during their walk through Kawabe Park. So Ono is confident that Dr. Saito knew who he was before the marriage negotiations started. So Setsuko's visit this year was brief, and she stayed with Taro and Noriko at their new home. So remember, in this episode, dear students, Noriko is finally married to Taro. That is Taro, the son of Dr. Saito. So we are told that in this visit, Setsuko is now staying with Taro and Noriko at their new home. So their walk together in the park was one of the only times they had to speak. So it makes sense then that Ono is still turning over some of the things she said in his mind a month later. At the time, he enjoyed the walk through the park with Setsuko on their way to meet Noriko and Ishiro. So Ono says that Kawabe Park is one of the city's nicest parks and holds a special interest for him because it was the site of Akira Sugimura's plans to leave his mark on the city. That is, build, the park to a modern standard. So in 1920 or 1921, Sugimura, who is the builder of Ono's house, planned to build a kabuki theater, a European-style concert hall, a museum, a pet cemetery in the park. Sugimura lost a great deal of his money, and these plans were ended. So now there are only oddly empty patches of grass where the buildings Sugimura hoped to build were supposed to stand. So Ono feels that Sugimura deserves admiration for aspiring to rise above the mediocre, even though his plans ultimately failed. So that day, Setsuko and Ono met Noriko and Ishiro by a statue, and then Ono took Ishiro to lunch at a department store. So Ishiro, then 8 years old, told Ono that his favorite food was spinach, and that Ono should eat as much spinach as he can, because it would give him strength. So looking at Ichiro, Ono noted that the traits he inherited from his father and mother, as well as his resemblance to Kenji as a boy. So he took a strange comfort in seeing this resemblance. So again, Ono explains that people not only take on traits, and people not only take on traits as children, but also in early adulthood, in imitation of teachers and mentors. So even after a student rejects much of a teacher's influence, mannerisms and gestures will be left as a trace of that influence. So Ono, we are told, still retains these traces of his teacher, Seiji Moriyama, whom he called Morisan, and he imagines some of his students still have some of his mannerisms. And again, he hopes that even if they have reassessed some of his teachings, they are still grateful for much of them. And another thing is that Ono reflects on his 7 years living at Morissan's villa, saying they were some of the happiest years of his life. So back then, the villa had already lost much of its splendor. There were collapsing roofs and holes in the floor, and again, only 2 or 3 rooms were in good condition. So in one of these rooms, Morissan students looked at their teachers' new works, praising their mastery and debating Morissan's intentions. So even though Morissan was in the room, he did not respond to their praise or opinions. And although this may seem arrogant, Ono feels that allowing students to debate was a better way for a very influential teacher to give instruction. So Morisan's leading pupil was named Sasaki, and if Sasaki suggested that someone's work was disloyal to Morisan's teaching, the offender often gave up on the painting entirely. So when Ono and the tortoise first arrived at the villa, the tortoise often had to destroy his work because it was disloyal, as Sasaki put it. So the tortoise had great difficulty grasping the principles of Morisan's style. So this style was defined by taking the world of the pleasure district as its topic, similar to the traditional work of Utamaro, but turning to European techniques like using blocks of color instead of bold outlines and using subdued tones. So Morissan sought to capture a melancholy nocturnal atmosphere and often included lanterns in his paintings. Remember the bars, the bars that were in the pleasure district were they they were lantern lit bars. So that's why there was a lot of lanterns in Morissan's paintings. That is to capture the nocturnal or the night atmosphere. So the tortoise thought that merely by painting, I mean, the tortoise thought that merely by including a lantern in his painting, then maybe some of his work would be accepted. So it reflects that every group of students, uh, will have a leader. So the leader sets an example for other students because he has the greatest mastery of the teacher's teachings. At the same time, this pupil is the most likely to see shortcomings in teachers' teachings and want to move in a different direction. So I think this Ono says when now referring to how people are used to mock, the tortoise for not being able to draw faster and again not being able to master their teacher, that is Morissan's art style. So to move in theory, that is, as we move on, uh, we also learn from that is Ono that in theory a teacher should be ready to accept some of these outcomes, but in practice a teacher who has invested a great deal in a student may see treachery in the fact that the student takes a new direction. So this is what happened to Sasaki. So his fellow students refused to tell him where his paintings were or to speak to him, and he was forced to leave the villa without anywhere to go. This was after Sasaki, who was the best pupil of Morissan, decided to come up with his new unique style. So this led to him being called a traitor. So after Sasaki left Morissan's villa, he was referred to as a traitor, and often the pupils exchanged insults in a joking manner. But comparing another pupil to the traitor eventually led the pupils to come to blows. That is, engage in a fight. So the atmosphere Morissan fostered was very intense, and he demanded total loyalty. Although it is easy to be critical of this in hindsight, Ono says it should be recognized that Morissan had ambitions to change the culture of painting in the city and dedicated a great deal of time and money to his pupils with this goal in mind. So Morisan not only influenced his students' painting, but also their lifestyles, because they were painting the floating world of the city's pleasure districts, that is the changing world. They spent many nights out late drinking or having parties at the villa with actors, dancers, and musicians. So sometimes the parties went all night and people would be passed out around the villa the next day. So it is during these parties and heavy drinkings that most of Morissan's students had an idea of what to draw. So one night, Ono walks away from the revelry and sits in a storeroom where no one goes. So he sits there for a long time until Morissan comes in and asks what is worrying him. So Morissan asks if there is something about his actor friend Gisaburo that offends him. Ono admits that he feels they have spent a great deal of time with the entertainers in the last few months. So Morrison does not reply but walks to the back wall of the storeroom and pulls out some of his old woodblock prints. So he says of them that he feels affection for his old works but sees now that they are fatally flawed. That is, they are not, to the standards that he wants. So Ono disagrees, saying that they seem to him to be an example of how Morissan's talent transcends the limitations of that style of art. So Morissan does not reply again. So after a moment, Morissan says that Gisaburo has had an unhappy life and is only happy in the moments late at night when a woman tells him the things he wants to hear. So he continues that the finest beauty in the world is to be found in pleasure houses late at night. Then he explains that the problem with his old work is that as a young man, he did not value the beauty of the floating world, fearing that it was decadent and a waste of time. Sono says that perhaps he's struggling uh, with something similar, and he will try to rectify the problem. So again, Morissan does not respond, but says that he no longer doubts what he does. So he feels he will look back at the end of his life and see his attempts to capture the beauty of the floating world as worthwhile. So reflecting on this exchange from the present, Ono says that he cannot be sure that this was what Morissan said. Indeed, it sounds like something he himself might have said while drinking at the Midihidari with his students. So, still in the same scene, Ono returns to his account of his lunch. Now back to the previous scene. Ono returns to his account of his lunch with Ishiro at the department store. So Ishiro pours spinach into his mouth as if it is a liquid, and then sticks out his chest and punches the air. So Ono asks if he is pretending to drink sack and then fight. So Ishiro explained that he is being Popeye Sailorman. That is a character I think Ishiro once watched. Then he asks Ono if sack makes someone strong, but Ono says it only makes you believe that you are strong. So Ishiro says that he drinks 10 bottles of sake a night. He reports that Aunt Noriko has bought some sake for dinner that night and laughs that she might get completely drunk. So again, Ono tells Ishiro that since he is 8 years old now, he will see that he gets a taste of sake that night. So Ishiro says nothing to this, and Ono says that Ishiro's uncle Kenji tried sake for the first time when he was around his age. Then, so remember Kenji is the late. He had died during the war. So Ishiro says that his mother might give them trouble. That is when he hears that the grandfather wants to give him some sake. So Ono says he will handle Setsuko. Ishiro says women don't understand men drinking, then laughs again at the idea that Noriko might get drunk at night. So Ichiro asked Ono if he knew Yukio Naguchi, and Ono says that he didn't personally know him. So he thinks that the adults must have been talking about Naguchi around Ichiro the night before. So Ichiro asked if Naguchi was like Ono, but then Ono says that that Setsuko, for one, said that there was no similarity, though Ono once compared himself to him. So he explains that Naguchi composed songs that were sung all over Japan during the war, and after the war, he felt he should apologize to all those who lost loved ones. So he killed himself. Ono adds that he was brave and honorable to admit his mistakes. During this time, Ishiro is silent. So Ono again says that he was only making a joke when he compared himself to Naguchi, and Ichiro should tell his mother that she misinterpreted him. Ishiro goes silent for some time. So that evening, Ono and Ishiro got to the Izumimachi area where Noriko and Taro's apartment is. So the area is full of small modern apartments which seem cramped to Ono, but which Noriko finds practical and convenient, being young couples, that is with Taro. So Ono tells Setsuko and Noriko that he wants to give Ichiro a taste of diluted sake, but his daughters say that is a bad idea. They say that that is a bad idea. So Ono says he has promised Ichiro and it will hurt Ichiro's pride if they say he is too young. So again, Ono says he remembers how his wife objected when he gave Kenji his first taste of sex at around Ichiro's age, adding that it did Kenji no harm. So he regrets bringing Kenji up in such a trivial disagreement and hardly pays attention to what Setsuko says next. So again, remember Kenji was Ono's only son. So another thing that happens is that Ono cannot be sure that he remembers everything correctly, but he thinks, Setsuko says that Ono surely gave a great deal of thought to Kenji's upbringing. So, but given what came to pass, their mother might have had better ideas about raising children. So Ono, sorry, cannot be sure that Setsuko really said something so unpleasant, although the things she said in Kawabe Park earlier in the day suggest she is capable of saying something like that. So he remembers their conversation, the earlier conversation they had at Kawabe Park. That is when they were going to meet Noriko and Ishiro. So at dinner, Taro describes a colleague who never meets the deadline, saying he has been given the name, that is the nickname, the Tortoise. And Ono excitedly tells them that he also once had a colleague nicknamed the Tortoise, but Taro says that most groups have both a leader and a tortoise. So Ono thinks about this, and he believes that Shintaro was the tortoise of his own pupils, even though he wasn't called that. So again, it reflects, that the tortoises of the world never rise above mediocrity because they are unwilling to take chances for the sake of principle. So they will never try something so grand as to transform, that is, as to transform Kawabe Park, as Sugimura attempted to. Another thing, dear students, is that in the episode, Ono recalls his relationship with the tortoise, of whom he was fond, but whom he never considered an equal. So Ono and tortoise often painted together in an old kitchen in the villa. And through flashback, we are told that one afternoon the tortoise said that he could tell that what Ono was working on was very special because he was bringing an intensity to the work and had requested that no one look at it until he finished. So the tortoise said he was lucky to have worked side by side with someone like Ono. And Ono asked the tortoise if he was happy with his work, and the tortoise said, indeed he was. So he said he was always striving to improve because he hoped someday to exhibit alongside Ono and Morisan. So Ono, we are told, let the matter drop. So again, a few days later, when he entered the kitchen, the tortoise looked at Ono in alarm. Gesturing towards Ono's painting, he asked if it was a joke. So Ono recalls that the tortoise had trusted him and took a risk in his career with him by leaving taquitos, and he had hoped the same thing would happen again in this instance. However, in a whisper, the tortoise called Ono a traitor and walked away. So the painting that the tortoise was shocked by is called Complacency, and it was inspired by a walk Ono took with Matsuda. So Ono and Matsuda were one day walking along a bridge overlooking the Nishizuru district, where many shanties were wedged in between two factories. So Matsuda said this was typical. People all over the country had been forced to leave their homes in the countryside and worked in factories. So Matsuda said there was a smell. He asked Ono whether he can smell the sewage even from up of the bridge, adding that politicians and businessmen and perhaps also artists rarely see this kind of poverty. So Ono sensed a challenge in Masuda's voice, so he suggested that they go down and look. So the shanty town was hot, crowded, and smelly. While walking through, Ono and Masuda saw three small boys bent over something that they prodded with sticks. So they turned around and scowled at Ono and Matsuda, who both concluded that they were torturing an animal. So Ono didn't think about the boys much at the time, but later he made them the central image in his painting, that is the complacency. And we are told in the painting, two images appear set in an image of the Japanese coastline. Then the bottom image depicts the three boys in the shanty town wearing rags but holding their sticks like brave samurai warriors ready to fight. And again above, that is an image of three fat, well-dressed, decadent-looking men. So the left-hand margin says complacency in bold letters, while the right-hand margin says, but the young are ready to fight for their dignity. So Ono adapted this work in the 1930s for his painting, that is the Eyes of the Horizon, which became famous in the city. So this painting shows two contrasting images bound together by Japanese coastline. So the top image shows three well-dressed men talking anxiously, while the lower image shows soldiers ready to go west towards Asia. So the right-hand margin of the painting says, "Eyes to the horizon," and the left hand says, "No time for cowardly talking. Japan must go forward." So reflecting from the present, Ono says that he recognizes the sentiments in the painting are outdated, but he brings it up to show how Matsuda impacted his career. Although he didn't initially like Matsuda, he found his ideas appealing. So it is Matsuda who introduced, who welcomed Ono into the other side. That is now using his artwork to, to show some propaganda or to spread propaganda. So one evening, not long ago after their visit to the slum, Ono and Masuda sit in a bar having a dispute. Ono proposes raising money for the people in the slum by selling paintings, and Masuda scoffs at this idea. So he says Ono has a child's understanding of the world and probably doesn't even know who Karl Marx is. So Ono says Karl Marx led the Russian Revolution. So still in the same conversation, Matsuda tells Ono that weak politicians and greedy businessmen are leading Japan into a crisis. And he says that the Okada Shingen Society, where he worked, hopes to awaken artists to the country's political situation so that they can produce works of genuine value. So Ono says that Masuda is mistaken about what art can and cannot do. So Masuda says that not only artists, but people of all walks of life need to unite to fight for the country. He explains that he wants the emperor's power to be restored and that Japan should forge an empire in Asia, just as the British and the French have done. And again, turning away from his recollections of Masuda's remarks, Ono looks back to the moment when the tortoise discovered the complacency, and he thinks that the tortoise was probably not disturbed by the political message of complacency, but instead noticed Ono's use of bold calligraphy and had outlines, techniques Morisans taught his students to reject. So, still in this episode, dear students, Ono shifts to Ono shifts his narrative to a conversation he had with Morisan a week after the confrontation with the tortoise. So Ono and Morisan go to the pavilion at Takami Gardens, which is elegantly decorated with hanging lanterns. In later years, that pavilion remains a favorite spot of Ono's until it is destroyed, that is during the war. It is also, he says, the place where he had his last conversation with Kuroda. So on the night he visits the pavilion with Morisan, the lanterns are unlit when they arrive. So Morisan asks Ono to light them. So Morisan asks Ono what is troubling him. Ono says it is a small thing. He cannot find certain paintings and the other pupils will not tell him where they are. So Morisan tells Ono that he has his paintings, and Ono says that he is very glad to hear that his paintings are safe. But Morisan does not reply to this. Remember, he had gone against, that is Morisan's teachings, and did something opposite what Morisan expected of him. So he apologizes if it alarmed Ono. That is, Morisan apologizes if the fact that he took the paintings alarmed Ono that they were missing, and says that Ono seems to be exploring curious avenues. So looking back, Ono is not sure if Morisan used that phrase or if this is what he himself said to Kuroda years later during their last conversation. So Morisan continues that it is not a bad thing for a young artist to experiment as long as he returns to serious work. So Ono says that he feels his recent work is the best work he has done. So Morisan says that perhaps there are other paintings, and he wants them to do what? He wants he wants, that is Ono, to bring back the remaining other paintings. So again, looking back years later, Ono reflects that Morisan's treatment of him may seem harsh, but it should be remembered how much Morisan had invested in him. So he thinks it is understandable that a teacher may overreact in such a circumstance, but of course, arrogance and possessiveness on a teacher's part should also be regretted. Sono reflects on visiting Kuroda's house the winter before the start of the war. So upon arriving at the house, he smells burning and knocks on the door. So we are told that a uniformed during that time and during the visit, a uniformed police officer answers and tells him that Kuroda has been taken to headquarters for questioning. So Ono can hear Kuroda's mother crying inside the house. So he asks to speak to the policeman's commanding officer. The policeman briskly tells him to leave or he will be brought in for questioning too. So Ono explains that he is an artist and a member of the cultural committee of the Interior Department and advisor to the Committee of Unpatriotic Activities, adding that he is the one on whose information the police were brought to the house. So he says there must be some mistake. So the uniformed officer leads Ono through the house to the backyard, where a plainclothes officer is standing by a bonfire, burning Kuroda's paintings. So Ono says he thought the officers would simply give Kuroda a talking to rather than arrest him. So he asks if they were authorized to burn the paintings and says they were many fine works around them. So here, dear students, the smelling of burning symbolizes symbolizes the bombings that took place during the war. So the plainclothes officer says they destroy all offensive material that isn't needed as evidence. So he says that the matter no longer concerns Ono and asks the uniformed policeman to show him out. So in the present, Ono says that this story is of limited relevance because he means recount what happened during Setsuko's visit last month. That is why, again, we say that Ono is a narrator who is unreliable, as he keeps on jumping from story to story, a story to another story, back and forth. So that night, Taro tells amusing stories about his work. Son is uncomfortable to see how Ishiro watches each time the sake is poured out. Remember, he had earlier on promised Ishiro to pour him some little sake. So Setsuko says to Taro that even though he jokes about his work, she understands from Noriko that it is a stimulating work environment. So Taro honestly says how optimistic everyone at KNC is and how inspiring his branch director is. Setsuko says that Suichi is also very inspired by his work at Nippon Electronics. Sono asks Taro if he thinks all the sweeping changes in Japan are entirely a good thing, suggesting there may be too much hastiness to follow the American way. But Taro admits that the changes have happened quickly, but says that he thinks Japan is finally on a good path. So Setsuko says that Suichi feels the same way, and Taro says that he went to a high school reunion the week before, and all his classmates had the same sense of optimism. But he says perhaps they should be corrected. So Ono says that he is sure the younger generation is right to believe in its splendid future. So another thing is that Ichiro reaches over, taps the sake flask, and looks at Ono. So to distract him, Taro asks what Ichiro would like to be when he grows up. And Ichiro responds by saying he wants to be the president of Nippon Electrics, where his father Switch is working. So which is the best company. So at the meal's end, he asks if all the sake is gone. When he hears that it is, he accepts this reality quietly. But Ono empathizes with Ishiro's disappointment, feeling that Setsuko should not have been so stubborn. So after dinner, Ono goes into the spare room where Ishiro is going to sleep. Ishiro asks Ono if Noriko is drunk and giggles at the idea. So Ono tells Ishiro that he will soon grow up and be allowed to drink sake. Uh, Ishiro is silent for some time, then says that Ono should not worry. He explains that sometimes his father wants to do something and his mother forbids it. So Ono shouldn't feel bad that she kept Ishiro from drinking the sake or sake. So he repeats that Ono shouldn't worry and asks if he's spending the night. So Ono responds by telling him that he is going back to his house, but he will come to say goodbye at the station the next day. Ono sits with Ishiro until his grandson falls asleep. So sitting there, he begins to turn over what Setsuko said to him that morning in Kawabe Park and to grow annoyed by it. So as the episode comes to an end, Ono goes to rejoin the adults in the main room. He says to Taro that it is a shame that he and Dr. Saito didn't get to know each other well until the marriage negotiations, since they were both connected by the art world and knew one another by reputation. So Taro agrees, and Ono looks pointedly at Setsuko, but she gives no sign that she understands the significance of Taro's agreement. So Ono describes the events that passed earlier that day in Kawabe Park. Walking along, Ono and Setsuko say how glad they are that Nariko's marriage worked out. So again, he says that is Ono says that it was good that he heeded Setsuko's advice to take precautionary steps. But Setsuko responds that she doesn't know what her father is referring to. And the father says that he had made sure that his career didn't create obstacles for Noriko by speaking out during the Miai about the mistakes he had made. So Setsuko says that Noriko told about the Miai but only to say she was puzzled by her father's behavior, as were the Saitos. So she adds that she and Suichi were also puzzled by Noriko's account of what he had said. So Ono tries to remind Setsuko about their conversation the year before, but Setsuko says again that she does not remember everything. So Ono and Setsuko continue walking. Setsuko says that Taro told her that Ono brought up Yukio Naguchi, a composer who had committed suicide. She says Taro was concerned by their conversation because it seemed to him that Ono was drawing a comparison between himself and Naguchi. So Ono reassures her that he is not considering suicide. Setsuko says that she understands that Naguchi's songs were very influential. So it makes some sense that he wanted to share responsibility for the direction of the war, that is, for the direction that the war took or the war went. But she adds, although her father painted some splendid paintings that were appreciated by other painters, he should not worry that he did not, he should not worry that he did any harm because his work had nothing to do with larger matters. So Ono says that this is very different from what Setsuko said to him last year. And Setsuko says she has no idea why her father's career would have any relevance to the marriage negotiations. Uh, Again, the older daughter Setsuko continues and says that the Saitos were puzzled by Ono's behavior at the Miyai. And Ono says he was under the impression that Dr. Saito appreciated what he said during the Miyai. So he says that Dr. Saito had followed his career over the years and would have been familiar with the mistakes he made. So it was appropriate for him to tell Dr. Saito his current view. And Setsuko says that Taro told her that Dr. Saito was not aware that Ono was an artist, but only knew him as a neighbor. So Ono says this is not true, and Setsuko accepts this, but insists that her father should not feel guilty for anything he did in the past. So at this point, Masuji Ono stops arguing with his daughter Setsuko, but in retrospect, he feels sure she is mistaken. So he clearly remembers meeting Dr. Saito when he moved to the neighborhood and how Dr. Saito said that it was a great honor to have an artist of your stature in our neighborhood. So dear students, that marks the end of episode 3, that is a summary, that is the scenes of events that took place in November 1949 of the novel and artist of the floating world by Kazuo Ishiguro. So thanks for being with me till the end, and keep it easy, Elimu. Until next time, bye.